Hi everybody, it's Tim with Engadget, and this is the Grid10 from Fusion Garage. You may know Fusion Garage as the company behind the failed Juju. This is the company's second coming of sorts, the new tablet that the company thinks will revolutionize the tablet industry, thanks in large part to this operating system you hear called GridOS. But let's take a quick look around the hardware first. 10.1-inch display up front. This is the highest resolution on a 10-inch tablet at the moment. On the left, a little hard to see, we have a 3.5mm headphone jack, proprietary 40-pin connector there, and a micro SD card reader there, which you can actually use to expand the usable storage of the device. Unlike other tablets, you can actually play media directly from the memory card. On the right, the tray where a SIM card would go, the power button, and the reset button, which unfortunately we actually had to use a couple of times as we were testing this device. Went through a number of different software revisions during our review process. This is the most recent one, pushed out just the morning of the review, actually. Now, this is, of course, the biggest focal point of the device, the GridOS. This is built on top of an Android kernel, Android 2.2 to be specific, but it is not actually Android, insists Fusion Garage. This is a totally new operating system, and rather than just having pages and pages of icons, you have this free-flowing 2D grid, which if you are a strategy gamer will look pretty familiar, pretty friendly to you. So instead of remembering what page your app's on, you just kind of have to remember what quadrant it is. And you can use this mini-map up here on the right to get around. These groupings of applications are called clusters. You tap in the middle and they will fold up. The grid will dynamically expand or contract as these do as well to give or take away room. And you can adjust these as you like. Tap Edit Grid, you can grab any of these and go away. Whoops. There, so I can move that from one cluster to the other. You can make new clusters very easily, and overall it's a very nice experience. But of course, since this is not actually Android, you don't have access to the full Android market. You don't have access to the Google Gmail app. You don't have access to Google Navigation and all the other niceties that Android gives you. But you can run applications downloaded from the Amazon App Store, and you can sideload APKs as well. But be warned, this device does not necessarily take advantage of honeycomb features. So if you have a tablet-friendly honeycomb app, it may not run as expected. We actually tried a SwiftKey keyboard on here, for example, and the honeycomb version of that keyboard would not run on this tablet. Only the keyboard version, the phone version would rather, and that didn't look quite so nice. So let's take a look at some web browsing, starting with hopefully web pages that you're familiar with. This is the browser that's built into the GridOS. That loaded reasonably quickly, but we're still pulling in some of the last straggling bits of content. But while that's happening, you can still scroll around. Now, pinch to zoom does work, but as you can see, it's a little bit choppy, not particularly responsive. But there it does indeed work. Now, one of the interesting things you can do here is do a long tap on any word, and it will highlight that word. You can then grab these carrots and drag them around. There we go. And then once you've highlighted the text that you want, you tap that little pie piece. It gives you an option of things you can do. You can copy, you can search based on that highlighted text, or you can do a selection of other things as well. Let's go ahead and buy a Kindle book based on that random batch of text, and that brings us over to Amazon. And as you can see, it split the browser window into two, so you can now look at two pages instead of just the one. Unfortunately, though, you can't control the two independently. You can't enter a web address over here and over here. You're really just restricted to where you went from that pie piece there to get in here. But you can, of course, follow links wherever you like. So that's somewhat interesting. A little bit of proper multitasking on the device here. A swipe in from the corner, in theory, brings up the menu. Perhaps not. Let's try two fingers up from the bottom. No, that's not working so well either. There are a number of gestures that work. Let's try this one more time. There we go. So there are a number of gestures. That gesture is basically the equivalent of hitting the menu key. It'd be one finger up from either corner or two fingers up from the bottom. Supposedly, let's stick with the diagonal. That works better. That is, again, the equivalent of the Android menu key. It brings up some options. I can now type in a web URL up here if I'd like to. There's a keyboard. We'll look at that again in a moment. And there are some other options down here on the right. So you can change settings, add a shortcut to the app, to the launcher page. You can switch to the mobile view, but we actually didn't find that to work for us. It presented the same version of the page regardless of what we did. But you can hide and show those. And as you have multiple tabs, those get added to this fun little wheel here that you can scroll through to go from one to the other and switch back and forth. If you like Engadget, you can have this one. If you prefer a bird, you can go with that one. Now, to go back home, 2 fingers down from the top. And if you'd like to go back, it's 2 fingers in from the right. Finally, if you want to bring up what's called the heartbeat, it's 2 fingers in from the left. The heartbeat effectively replaces, well, this is how you do multitasking in the OS itself. You can see a list of icons here representing the different things I've been doing recently. And to get back to any of them, you just tap that, and it brings you back to that application. Now, we like gestures in tablets. On the Playbook, the way that tablet uses gestures is quite nice, but here it's a little bit clumsy. For one thing, you have to use 2 fingers. And if you're starting off the bezel and going on, 1 finger should be enough to tell the device that you're making a gesture, but having to use 2 fingers, especially when you're usually holding the tablet like this with your thumbs, having to then reach in with your hand is a bit of a drag. So that's unfortunate. The other problem with gestures is that when you swipe in from the side, as you can see, the grid itself actually moved. And as I do back here, it doesn't register the gesture before it actually registers your touch. So if you're in a browser and you try to go back by swiping like that, you're quite likely to actually tap a link on the page and it'll wind up going to another page rather than going back. That's pretty annoying. And finally, another gesture-related thing, the only way to adjust your volume is right here with this control on the upper right. There's no physical volume key on the device. So if you're in the middle of a game and you want to turn the volume down, you have to exit the game, go back to the dash, tap up here, and then scroll this little wheel to adjust volume. That is a little bit annoying to say the least. Now let's take a look at the lock screen, which you saw briefly just a moment before. This is different than the typical Android lock screen. Now you actually sign in. Now we've trained it to recognize an E for obvious reasons. As you can see, it worked pretty well. But we've also found that it accepts other shapes, like perhaps a circle. And try something else. A rather blocky looking E. Yes. So it's a little bit too loose, actually. It should be a little bit more careful in terms of what it will let you sign to get in. Let's take a look at the messaging application. Tap here. This is basically an aggregate of your email, your Facebook account, your Twitter account, all brought together into one list. But it sounds nice in theory, but in practice it's actually a little too slow to be useful. If you can see here, I'm looking at my Twitter list now. If I switch over to all messages, I tapped waiting. Okay, pop that up, go back to Twitter. Waiting. Yeah, not particularly responsive, not exactly the kind of social networking experience that you might be looking for. It is at least not crashing like it was in an earlier build of the software, but it's still not something that we find to be particularly usable. There's also a Maps application built in called Grid Maps. This would be an attempted replacement at Google Maps. Unfortunately, it is not nearly as usable as Google Maps. Ultimately, it does give you a nice map view, and you can search on here. I have GPS turned off at the moment, by the way. And you can search for things and find an array of different Starbucks near you. Tap any one, and normally it will give you directions if you have GPS turned on. You can also get Yelp reviews, and you can zoom in things here and take a look. You can also angle things slightly, but since everything is flat, it doesn't really give you much of a better perspective. So this is definitely usable. You can get directions here. You can look on a map here, but it does pale in comparison to Google Maps. And ultimately, the operating system itself largely pales in comparison to Android. It is different, and we definitely like the way of interacting with apps. It's actually just kind of fun to scroll around here. But, that's going to get old eventually, and at that point, you're left with a tablet that doesn't have access to the Android market. You're left with a tablet that doesn't offer the performance of comparable Android tablets. And you're left with a device that doesn't have nearly the battery life of those tablets. We've been watching this percentage has been going down as we've been going here. The battery life on this device is about half what we found on comparable 10-inch tablets. So overall, we have to say we're a little bit disappointed by the Grid 10. We were really hoping that this would be another alternative in the tablet game, but as it is, we have a hard time recommending this over any of the more established tablets, whether they be Android or iOS. So again, this is the Grid 10 from Fusion Garage review on Engadget.